I keep the grocery receipts in a shoebox under the bathroom sink now, not because I need to, but because for 11 years I had to. My husband started keeping them in a binder. He had a system. Every receipt went into a plastic sleeve organized by date, by category: groceries, gas, pharmacy, miscellaneous. He'd review them every Sunday evening at the kitchen table with a yellow highlighter, and if something didn't make sense to him, he'd bring it to me like evidence. $12 at CVS. What was this? Shampoo. We have shampoo. Mean ran out. He'd write a note in the margin. Not say anything more. Just write a note. I want to tell you that I saw it coming. I want to say there was a moment early on where something in me whispered, "This is wrong. Leave now." But that's not how it works. That's never how it works. You're in the middle of a life you built together, and the changes are so gradual, so reasonable sounding, that by the time you understand what's happening, you've already lost the habit of questioning it. My name is Vivian. I'm 63 years old. I live in Dayton, Ohio, and I have, for the first time in over a decade, a bank account that no one else knows about. This is how I got there. My husband retired in March of 2019. He'd worked 31 years as a plant supervisor at a manufacturing company outside of town. Long hours, rotating shifts, home late, gone early. I'd spent those same 31 years working as a school librarian, raising our son Timothy, running the house, managing every birthday card and dentist appointment and leaky faucet that needed a call to the landlord. When he retired, I thought things would get easier. I thought we'd finally have time together. I thought we'd maybe travel, visit Timothy and his wife out in Portland, finally see the Grand Canyon. What I didn't understand was that my husband had spent 31 years being in charge of things. And when the plant no longer needed him to be in charge, he needed somewhere else to put that. He put it on me. It didn't start with money. It started with the calendar. He wanted to know where I was going, when, and with whom. I was still working part-time at the library, 3 days a week, and he'd ask me, the night before each shift, what time I'd be home. Not because he was worried. There was no warmth in the question. It was inventory. He was logging my schedule the way he used to log production timelines. I'd tell him 4 o'clock, and if I walked in at 4:15 because Janet from the reference desk wanted to show me pictures of her new grandchildren, he'd be standing in the kitchen. It's 4:17. I know. Janet, you said 4. I started leaving at 3:45. About 4 months after he retired, he sat down with me at the kitchen table and said he wanted to talk about our finances. We'd always had separate checking accounts, mine for my salary, his for his, and a joint savings account we both contributed to. It had worked fine for decades. I paid the utilities and groceries. He paid the mortgage and car insurance. We split things without a spreadsheet. It had never been a problem. He said it was inefficient. He said that now that he was home full-time, it made more sense to consolidate. He'd manage the money, pay all the bills from one account, and I'd have a weekly allowance for personal expenses. It would be simpler, he said. Less to keep track of. He'd been running budgets his whole career. He knew how to do this. I remember looking at him across the table and thinking, he genuinely believes this is a favor. I like having my own account, I said. It's not practical, Vivian. I've had that account since I was 22, and this makes more sense now. Things are different. I pushed back twice more over the following weeks. He didn't yell. He never yelled. He just explained, patiently and repeatedly, like I was struggling to understand a simple concept, that this was the logical adult approach to household finances, that he wasn't taking anything from me. He was organizing. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from arguing with someone who reframes every objection as a misunderstanding. Eventually, I stopped arguing. I told myself it was a trial. I told myself I could always change it back. What I didn't know then, what I have a name for now, is that this is called coercive control. It doesn't always look like screaming. It doesn't always leave marks. Sometimes it looks like a man with a yellow highlighter and a binder full of grocery receipts, explaining, very calmly, that he's just trying to help. He didn't close my account. I want to be clear about that. He couldn't have. It was my account in my name only, and a bank cannot close a customer's account without that customer's authorization. What he did was convince me to close it myself. I signed the paperwork. I handed him the debit card. I told myself I was being a good partner. After that, I had $90 a week. $90 for everything personal: clothes, toiletries, a birthday gift, a cup of coffee with a friend. He paid the bills, bought the groceries, or gave me a grocery budget with receipts required, and handled everything he deemed a household expense. My pension from the school district, I was still drawing partial benefits, went directly into the joint account he controlled. My part-time library salary went in too, at his insistence, after he pointed out it was more efficient. Every cent I earned went somewhere he could see it, and what came back to me was $90. In an envelope, on Monday mornings. The envelope part, I still can't explain why that felt like the worst of it. There's something about receiving money from your own husband in an envelope on a schedule that hollows something out in you, something that had been solid. His life didn't change much. He played poker on Wednesday evenings with a group of men from his old job. I never heard him mention a budget for that. He had lunch every Friday at Donahue's Diner with his brother. He bought fishing equipment online, and it appeared on the porch in boxes, and I never saw a receipt. Once, I asked him about it, gently, the way I'd learned to ask things, and he said the fishing gear came out of his personal savings, which was separate, which was not the joint budget. I asked what my equivalent of his personal savings was. He looked at me like I'd said something rude. That was around month 7. I called Timothy that November. He was 3 time zones away, busy with a toddler and a new job, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice before I even got through my sentence. I didn't say everything. I said things were a little tense. I said Dad had gotten more rigid since retiring. Timothy said that sounded like Dad. He said to give it time. He said retired guys sometimes needed to find a new rhythm. I said okay. I got off the phone and sat in my car in the library parking lot for 20 minutes. I want to tell you there was one dramatic moment that changed everything. There usually is in stories, but the truth is it was more like accumulation. It was 11 months of Sunday receipt reviews and Monday envelopes and being asked at 58 years old why I needed $8 for a paperback at the used bookstore. It was the way he'd stand in the doorway of whatever room I was in, just stand there until I acknowledged him. It was the fact that I'd started eating lunch in my car even on days I wasn't working, just to have an hour where no one was tracking me. The moment that crystallized it, the one I come back to, was a Tuesday in February. I had a dental appointment. A cleaning, routine, nothing. I told him the night before, because I'd learned to tell him things the night before, and he said, fine. When I came home, he was at the kitchen table with his laptop open, and before I'd even taken my coat off, he said, how long does a cleaning take? About 45 minutes. Why? You were gone 2 hours and 20 minutes? I looked at him. He was looking at the laptop. I stopped at Walgreens, I said. For what? And I thought, I am 60 years old. I have worked for 32 years. I raised a child. I have worked for 32 years. I raised a child. I cannot stop at Walgreens without a reason. I didn't say that. I said, vitamins. And I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of the bathtub, and I thought very quietly and very clearly, I have to get out of this house. I didn't do anything for 3 weeks after that. I turned the thought over and over, the way you turn something heavy, looking for a way to lift it. I had no independent income I could access. I had no separate account. I didn't know what I had access to legally, or what leaving would mean financially, or whether I was overreacting. That last one, whether I was overreacting, sat on my chest every morning. He hadn't hit me, he didn't drink, he'd never called me a name. What he had done was quieter and harder to explain, and I was afraid no one would believe me, or worse, that they'd believe me, but tell me it wasn't that bad. In March, I went to the library, not to work, on my day off, and I used the public computer terminal instead of my work login. I typed, "Financial abuse in marriage." Then, "Coercive control." Then, "What to do if your husband controls your money." I read for 2 hours. I learned that what I was describing had a name. I learned it was recognized as a form of domestic abuse in most states, and in the UK it was actually a criminal offense. I learned that financial abuse affects an estimated 1 in 4 women in long-term relationships. I learned that isolation and monitoring are tactics, not personality quirks. I learned that the fact that he'd never raised his hand didn't mean I was safe. I printed 3 pages and put them inside a copy of a John Updike novel I brought from home. I put the novel in my work bag. The next thing I did was make an appointment with a financial advisor, something I found by searching women's financial resources in Dayton. Her name was Patricia, and she worked out of a small office near the university. I told her I was in a controlling marriage and I needed to understand what I was legally entitled to. She was calm and matter-of-fact in the way that women who have had this conversation many times are calm and matter-of-fact. She told me that in Ohio, pension benefits earned during a marriage are typically considered marital assets. She told me I had options. She told me to come back when I was ready to talk specifics. I didn't tell my husband I'd gone. I said I was working. Sometime in late April, a co-worker, a younger woman named Sue, who'd been at the library 3 years, noticed something. I don't know exactly what she saw. She just asked me one day, very quietly, while we were shelving returns, whether everything was okay at home. I said yes, automatically, the way you do. She nodded slowly and said, "Okay, I'm just asking because you seem like you're always a little bit braced for something." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "Is it that obvious?" She said she'd grown up with a father like that. She said she recognized the posture. I told her a few things. Not everything, but a few things. She listened without interrupting, which not everyone does. When I finished, she said there was a program through a local women's resource center, not a shelter, just a program for women in non-physically violent situations who needed help navigating their options. She wrote the number on a Post-it note. I put it in my coat pocket and washed it through the laundry twice before I finally called. The woman at the resource center was named Denise. She was a counselor, and she had a direct and unhurried way of speaking that I found immediately steadying. I talked to her 3 times on the phone over May and June, always from my car, always in a parking lot somewhere away from the house. She never told me what to do. She helped me think through what I wanted and what I needed and what was realistic. She told me that women in controlling relationships often stay for longer than they planned because the planning itself is terrifying, and that was normal, and it didn't mean I was weak. In June, I opened a checking account at a credit union across town. Not the bank where we had the joint accounts, a different institution entirely. I used my work address. I put $45 in it. $45 from the grocery budget, taken out in cash over 3 weeks, a few dollars at a time, at the self-checkout, so there was no cashier to remember me. I stood at that credit union counter and I felt my hand shaking slightly and the teller didn't notice, and I thought, this is the first money that is only mine in 4 years. Over the next 2 months, I deposited small amounts whenever I could. I also talked to Patricia, the financial advisor, again. I started understanding the specifics, what our assets were, what a divorce filing in Ohio would likely look like, what I might expect in terms of the pension division. I called Timothy in July, and this time I told him more. He was quiet for a long time. He said he was sorry he hadn't seen it sooner. He said his door was open if I needed it. I said I just needed to know the door was there. He said it was. By August, I had a plan. Not a perfect plan, Plans in situations like this are never perfect, but a workable one. I waited for a Thursday. My husband had a standing appointment on Thursday afternoons, a cardiology follow-up, 40 minutes away, always at least 2 hours gone, because he stopped at a hardware store on the way back. I knew his schedule because he had always made sure I knew his schedule. I called Sue the night before and asked if I could drop something at her apartment on Thursday. She knew what I was saying. She said, of course. Thursday morning, I got up at my normal time. I made coffee. I put his cup on the counter. I walked upstairs after he left, and I stood in the bedroom for a moment, and I looked at the binders on his shelf. 3 of them, all labeled, all organized, and I felt something loosen in my chest. I packed 1 bag, 1 rolling carry-on in navy blue. I took my important documents, passport, social security card, the printed pension paperwork I'd copied quietly at the library. I took 3 changes of clothes, my good coat, my medications. I took the photograph of Timothy as a baby that sits on my nightstand. I left my wedding ring on the dresser, not as a statement, just because it belonged to a version of me that was done. I drove to Sue's. I left my car there and she drove me to a hotel, just for 1 night, while things settled. I sat in the hotel room that Thursday evening, and I ate takeout Thai food alone at a small table by the window, and I thought, I am 61 years old and I just left, and I am okay. He called 8 times while I was driving, then 11 more. I know because I counted them later, sitting in the hotel room with my phone face up on the bed, then 6 texts, then a voicemail I didn't listen to until the next morning. The voicemail was not what I expected. There was no rage. He sounded confused. He sounded, for the first time in years, uncertain. He said he didn't know what had happened, and he wanted to talk. He said he'd like me to come home so we could work things out. I listened to it twice. Then I put the phone down, and I called Timothy. I stayed with a friend from the library for 3 weeks while I arranged next steps. She had a spare room, and she never asked me to explain myself more than I wanted to. Timothy flew in early September. He stayed for a weekend. He helped me look at an apartment, a 1-bedroom near the university neighborhood, reasonably priced and with a lot of afternoon light. We walked through it together, him and me, and he said, "Mom, I think this is good." And I stood at the window looking out at a maple tree in early September color, and I thought, yes, I think so too. The divorce was not uncomplicated. He hired a lawyer, and there was a period of several months that I don't fully want to recount here, because it was exhausting and expensive. And there were moments I doubted everything. But Patricia had prepared me well, and the attorney she recommended was competent and straightforward. And in Ohio, marital assets, including pension benefits accumulated during the marriage, are subject to equitable division. The settlement was fair, not generous, but fair. I moved into the apartment in November. The first morning I woke up there, I didn't set an alarm. I made coffee slowly, and I drank it at the kitchen table, and nobody asked me a single question. I sat there for probably an hour. Just sat. It is hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it how profoundly ordinary that was, and how extraordinary it felt. I still work at the library, 3 days a week. I've added a 4th day since the divorce. Sue and I have lunch on Tuesdays. Timothy calls on Sunday mornings, and we talk for a long time. Last spring, he and his wife brought my grandson out for a visit. He's 2.5, curious about everything, and we spent an afternoon at the park, and I bought everyone ice cream, mine included, without a thought, without a calculation, without a receipt to save. I keep the shoebox under the bathroom sink, not because I'm worried, just because I remember. There's something I want to say to you, and I want to say it plainly, without softening it, if you are reading this and something in it feels familiar. The monitoring, the allowance, the receipts, the sense of bracing. What you're describing has a name. It's called financial abuse, and it's called coercive control, and it is recognized by the law in many places and by every professional who works in this field as a form of domestic abuse. It doesn't require a bruise to count. It doesn't require a raised voice. It requires only that one person has made it systematically impossible for another person to feel free. You are not overreacting. You are not too old. You are not too settled. You do not owe anyone another 11 years of envelopes. It is not too late to choose yourself. It was not too late for me. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since I moved into this apartment. Not in any cosmic or religious sense, just in the plain, observable way that one thing leads to another, and eventually you're standing somewhere you never expected, holding a life you had to build back from scratch. My husband didn't become the man with the binder overnight, and I didn't become the woman who left overnight either. That's the part that took me longest to accept. We were both, in our own ways, the product of years of small choices, his to tighten, mine to accommodate. Neither of us woke up one morning and decided this was how things would go. It accumulated the way quiet things do, until the weight of it was everywhere and I'd stopped noticing I was carrying it. What I know now is that control like that doesn't sustain itself on cruelty alone. It sustains itself on the other person's silence, on their patience, on their willingness to explain away what they're seeing, because the alternative, naming it, confronting it, leaving, is so much harder than staying. I was patient for 11 years. I was reasonable. I kept thinking that if I just didn't push, things would ease. They didn't ease. They calcified. The turning point wasn't the envelope, or the highlighter, or even the 2 hours and 20 minutes he timed at the dentist. The turning point was the moment I sat on the edge of that bathtub and let myself think clearly for the first time in years. Clarity is a form of courage. I don't think we talk about that enough. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just a quiet moment where you stop arguing with what you already know. What I did after that, the library computer, the credit union across town, the $45 saved $3 at a time, none of it felt brave while I was doing it. It felt terrifying and small. But that's what intelligence actually looks like in practice, I think. Not a grand gesture. A series of careful, private decisions made by someone who has finally decided to take herself seriously. Sue saw something in me I couldn't see in myself yet. Patricia gave me information I didn't know I was allowed to have. Timothy, when I finally told him the truth, didn't tell me I was overreacting. Those 3 people didn't rescue me. But they held open a door I had to choose to walk through myself. That distinction matters to me more than I can say. I think about the women who are still in the middle of it, still counting receipts, still bracing, still telling themselves it isn't that bad because he never raised a hand. I want to say to them what nobody said to me until I was almost 61 years old. The absence of violence is not the presence of safety. A person can take everything from you without ever touching you. Your money, your movement, your sense of your own judgment. And you can take it back. Not easily, not without fear. But you can. The shoebox under my bathroom sink is almost empty now. A few old receipts I haven't thrown out yet. I keep meaning to. Maybe I'll keep it there a little longer, as a reminder that I once had to hide $45 from my own husband, and that I used those $45 to start over. That is enough of a lesson for one lifetime.